recording started and the live streaming. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back to Audit Committee. We're still on item 6 and we'll move to Internal Audit Report 2627 on museums. Andrew, over to you to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. The objective of this review was to consider whether adequate control is exercised over the Council's museum operations, specifically heritage and historical assets and their management. Overall, we've been able to take limited assurance with the control framework driving a major net risk at a service level. Assurance was available over a number of areas, including the service's accreditation in 2018, a clear governance and staffing structure, building security arrangements that appeared fit for purpose at site visits, and public engagement through the website. However, various risks were identified, including gaps in strategic plans, policies and procedures, record-keeping gaps, including the asset data space currently recording approximately 10% of estimated items, incorrect location data, no regular stock takes, accession decisions not formally evidenced, and there have been no evidence of de-accession reviews. In terms of loans management, there were expired and unauthorised loan agreements, insufficient insurance documentation, missing condition reports and valuations, and there were issues in terms of assets held by leased museums. Around preservation arrangements, environment and pest monitoring systems are in place. However, these were not consistently being monitored. And in terms of emergency plans, these were not being tested or communicated to staff, and there were gaps in salvage lists. The service does, however, have a comprehensive improvement plan in place and has agreed to a time-bound action plan to address these risks for upcoming reaccreditation. Thank you and welcome any questions.
Yep, before I open it up for questions, Alan Ray is on the call, the Head of Communities Wellbeing and Partnership. Alan, is there anything that you would like to add to the report?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I really found the report and the internal audit process very helpful. So thank you to Andy and your team for working with the service through it. I am joined by Amy Miller, our Museums Development Coordinator, who is part of our audit lead from the service, so we'll be able to pick up some of the technical questions that some of you might have as well. But I did want to just provide a short management response if I can. As was mentioned, the service was externally accredited in 2018, and that accreditation runs until the end of August of this year, with the next reaccreditation in September. Now, since that last accreditation cycle, things have moved on, and the world of the accreditation has developed as well, and also the working environment for the service has changed materially, including that impact of the pandemic and the recovery activity associated, and additional demands with the development work that we've been doing as well around especially the levelling up projects and working towards the Museum of Aberdeenshire. As part of LLA, which was formed, as you know, in 2019, a new team structure was put in place, and the previous head of service identified some of the legacy issues that the service is continuing to deal with and will do for some time, and appointed a conservator post, and that increased the capacity for supporting the operation and reintroduction of the conservation lab. The service has also completed the extensive work to improve physical organisation of stores and to strengthen security arrangements and modernise the governance frameworks that we work towards and have been through policy committee. The audit acknowledges some of these as well, and what I would say is that the service has proactively identified some of the failures which was raised from audit. So what I would say is that these were proactively brought to some of the auditors' attention, in advance as work has been mapped out to seek our reaccreditation status, which we're very confident that we will achieve. In terms of the improvement needs, I think they are really, really valuable, and operationally as a relatively new head of service as well, very, very helpful for me personally, and something that we've been discussing as a team as to how we move forward. What I would say is that, I would hope that we could view the context of the audit through the lens of a service which has already made significant progress over the years, has got that external accreditation, works with national partners, and seeks multi-million-pound investment. We are continually moving forward and modernising the improvement within the service, rather than starting from a position of inactivity or a lower professional standard. So I want to give that kind of context. I would also, if you don't mind, Chair, just give a few actions which have taken place since the audit as well, just for some context. So currently live at the moment, there's a museum technician role. That role is very operational, and that will add to the capacity within the team on a day-to-day basis, so that documentation control and some of the things that have been mentioned will be better equipped moving forward. And also the collection management officer role was filled kind of at the same time as the audit was going on, and is now fully embedded into the service. That post has a wide remit, but particular focus at the moment on the accreditation work, and dealing with some of the documentation backlog which we know exists. With the reaccreditation in September, the team are focused on that, and we have got a planned action in place, which I'm sure Amy can speak to, and that includes things like the introduction of procedures which were not required the first time round but are now, and that aligns to the framework that the audit was based again, which is the updated standards, which is based on our reaccreditation as well. So some big ticket items in there I appreciate, and some of that is, and most of that actually led from some of the legacy in the scope, but I do want to give my assurances that we all take our role very seriously in our stewardship of the Museum and Culture Service, and the heritage that it plays. So, but that was really our introduction, Chair, and happy to have a conversation and take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. There are a number of hands up. Councillor Reynolds. Glenn, good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much, and thank you to Mr. Ray for that contextual update, historical and in terms of the legacy. I wanted to sort of extend my questioning somewhat in terms of the arm's length arrangement. So my focus, Alan, is very much around the governance framework as we are at the moment, and systemic issues which have been identified through this audit, not least in relation to the arm's length arrangement, because what I'm seeking clarification and assurance around is the fact that this audit clearly highlights specific gaps in the LLA framework. And it poses the question that because LLA operates at a slight operational distance, the question is whether scrutiny is being applied through the lines of accountability. And it begs the question, is the Council's Directorate, ECS, in relation to this, exercising sufficient robust oversight over LLA's day-to-day operations, or is the governance slipping through the cracks of the arm's length model that we currently have? And it may be that some of the changes and update that Alan has referred to address some of these issues, but I think there is a broader, wider causation in terms of the problems identified within the audit. And as we go forward, I think that there's a framework issue and challenge here which we need to address. If that still exists, irrespective of what Alan has said, how do we address the slippage that's taking place? What's the solution to this ongoing and historical problem? Thank you.
Alan, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind just clarifying, if I can, with Councillor Reynolds, when we're talking about arm's length, are we talking about partners that we work with, or are we talking about Live Life Aberdeenshire, which of course is the council? We're not an arm's length function.
Well, it's the relationship, it's the nature of the arrangement that exists between the council and obviously LLA being part of it. So I'm referring to the slightly different relationship that's incorporated into this process with LLA. That's really what I'm talking about. It's the governance around LLA and the directorate and the museum service.
Sure. I mean, and in terms of some of the governance framework and assurance that you're speaking of, I mean, I can give you my opinion as the head service, and in the museums team forming part of Live Life Aberdeenshire, which reports into the Communities Committee, is absolutely, in my experience, been the correct place for it to be. I don't really understand how that fits in with the audit, to be honest. But in terms of the actual policy updates, which we have recently taken back through in September, which you obviously sat on, we have our framework to align to council obligations, and then we have obviously our service standards, which is where the professionals within the world of museums and heritage sits. And I'm joined by Amy, who's one of them. In terms of our operating procedures, I think what the audit has done is highlighted some operational gaps. And the operational gaps can be resolved and will be resolved, and we have my assurances for that. Some of however, unpicking the history of the number of collection items that we have, which is vast and in various different formats, and then also the huge developmental work which needs to go in and does go in and will continue to go in with all of the third parties and local heritage fund trusts to larger organisations that the team work on. And what I would say is that the service works within its means and has a defined budget, and that's so what we do is use that to the best of our ability. If that's to be expanded, then yes, of course, we could maybe do a little bit more, but that's around the context of what the council would like us to do, as opposed to, I think, how we do it, and if we have the governance, I think we have a good system in place, to be honest.
Can I just clarify?
Yeah, just before you come back, Alan, Lawrence Finley's on the call, so I'll ask if Lawrence has got anything to add further to that, and then you can come back.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee, and thank you, Chair, for bringing me in there. And just a little bit of background here from my perspective as director, and just to reinforce Alan's points, that LLA is part of ECS, which is part of Aberdeenshire Council, that there are no arm's length arrangements whatsoever. Obviously, in the early days, we spoke a little bit about ALIO within the council kind of model when we set up the Culture and Sport Subcommittee. Councillor Reynolds, you'll remember that very well, of course, which was then disbanded. So very much part of ECS. And as Alan referred to in his introduction earlier, his predecessor, Mrs. Nicholl, came to me in about 2020. She'd only been in post about a year, and she'd identified some real issues and gaps in relation to the culture and museum service, which is why she put in place the restructure and sought my permission as her director to do that. Had identified the budget. That was all put in place. We went into lockdown and so on. However, Avril was quite clear with me there were many decades worth of work that was required in terms of our collection, given its size and scale. So that, just to give you that reassurance, that was identified through our day-to-day line management arrangements between the head of service and the director, restructure put in place. And of course, Amy is one person in one post, and we've also In that intervening period, the council has agreed to the Levelling Up project in Peterhead, which has required a significant amount of Amy's time. So it is one of those, did we know about these issues? Yes, absolutely. Do we have an action plan in place to address them? Yes, absolutely. Will it be done tomorrow? No, it will take a period of time, obviously, given the amount of pressures that we have. But I just wanted to come in to give that further information there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Lawrence, for that. I guess the point that I'm making, that irrespective of what it's referred to, and I take the point that I'm aware, obviously, of the arm's length arrangement situation historically, but the day-to-day aspect of this around the operational distance, which in many ways this report identifies gaps, I believe, in terms of the LLA framework regarding the Aberdeenshire Museum service. And irrespective of whether it is or isn't legally or otherwise an arm's length arrangement, the reality is, and the reassurance that I've been seeking, is indeed those gaps, Lawrence, that you have referred there, and the slight operational distance between LLA, the Directorate and the Museum Service, and those gaps in this report which you've just referred to in terms of ongoing. So that's the crux of the issue, really, that I'm seeking some sort of reassurance as to what are the gaps that still exist and what is being done to resolve those. Thank you.
Thanks. If I can come in just in terms of some of the operational elements, I mean, clearly the reaccreditation cycle that we're currently on will take care, I would expect, and well, having known what the plan is, will take the vast majority of the operational issues which were raised within the audit to a baseline, essentially. With that, we are charged to keeping that momentum going, and you know, from an operational level, that will take place. But we also have an opportunity to do, and what we have been doing for the last kind of 18 months or so, which has been brought about by decisions made by council to invest in the museum service through the Levelling Up projects into the Museum of Aberdeenshire, as the stage 1 funding that we secured project officers for has enabled us to do a lot of outreach and a lot of engagement with our communities, but also within the world of heritage in Aberdeenshire, and that is working with local heritage groups as well. It's our aspiration that we could develop this further, and I think the new Museum of Aberdeenshire gives us opportunity to look at the structures in place as well, and all roads leading to that Museum of Aberdeenshire, so to speak, and how that then translates into the developmental part of the service, which will make that work and live and breathe, plus the day job, the day-to-day nuts and bolts of the service. So I think that we're in a good place to take that next stage forward, actually. Thanks.
Okay, Glenn.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
Councillor Mayor. Doreen.
Thank you. Thank you. Alan, you mentioned the accreditation, but question is, how certain are we that we get that accreditation, bearing in mind this audit? And what are the consequences if we don't? The other thing is that it is a real concern that only 10% of the collection is, officially catalogued. And this is our heritage. This is, not only our heritage, well, it is all our heritage, but some of this these back catalogued, uncatalogued items belong to other people. So is there an opportunity for us to go out and ask for volunteers, whether that be through the university, through people taking, archaeology or whatever degree it is, that they might come on board and do some voluntary work, helping to update this catalogue sooner? I know there's history buffs that like this sort of thing. I think it's really important that we do get this catalogue as complete as possible, as soon as possible. And it's obvious from the staffing levels that we're not going to do that with the present staff, and especially with the pressures with the Museum of Aberdeenshire.
Thank you, Councillor Mayor. Yeah, I'll maybe take your questions in reverse if that's okay. I think on the volunteers, I think that that developmental work will be absolutely fundamental to the service as we go on over the coming period and into over the weeks, months, years. And as I kind of alluded to, the Levelling Up project has enabled us to establish further and greater links with those, on a more than just a transactional basis with the local heritage that we have dotted around Aberdeenshire, who play an absolutely fabulous role in terms of keeping that rich history alive, and they're all volunteers. So I would say on an arm's length basis to the third parties, there's a lot of engaged activity that happens already. But I think your point to pull together that common goal, what the Museum of Aberdeenshire gives us the opportunity, and through expanding the collection, now there are 25,000 items on there already. What it does though is gives us the opportunity to have a bit more of a systematic way of doing that, both blended with staff and then leading pockets of the community for their particular area. So I do think that will only get better over time, and I share your view about many hands making light work in terms of that process. I would say, whilst we want to get everything on that central database, we do have a database of our collections. They just take different shapes and forms, and that makes things difficult to research, find, and archive. So, for example, touching on what Lawrence had mentioned around the backlog, we have different formats in terms of paper, physical card, floppy disks, memory sticks, all things like that, which we have records of, and that 250,000 kind of figure which we are using in terms of what the full collection could look like is based on our knowledge of what sits within all these files as well. So there is a sequencing here which we're very much up for, and I really admire the ambition as well, and we share it, and I think so do our heritage partners that we work with too, and I think that's a good route for us in terms of the accreditation. How confident are we? I'm very confident in terms of the reaccreditation cycle. There had been a gap analysis done before the audit. This has been quite methodical and planned in as to how we were approaching some of the outstanding elements and work that's needed. But I will ask Amy just to pop in to the call if she can, just to maybe talk through what the accreditation process looks like, and as you say, the consequences are if we haven't got our ducks in a row for the 1st of September. What does that mean going forward? But it would be, but yeah, Amy, if you want to come in, that would be helpful.
Yep. Good morning, Chair and Committee. Yes, so accreditation is a national standard that is set by Arts Council England, but administered here in Scotland by Museums Gallery Scotland, and that's a standard that museums aim to achieve to prove their professionalism. So when you are accredited, you are opened up to applying for grants that are only for accredited museums from various bodies, in terms of when you're asking other museum partners for loans. They look favorably upon those requests because you meet that standard that hopefully they also meet. And also for us here in Scotland, if you're an accredited museum, you can apply for items that go through the treasure trove process. So if you're familiar with that, it's if an item is found in the ground by a metal detectorist or just by chance, or an organized dig, it technically belongs to the Crown, and then the Crown, through the treasure trove process, distributes these collections to accredited museums in Scotland. And that's a major source of some of our acquisitions. So accreditation means a lot to us, and we're quite proud that we do have it currently. Now the scheme has changed since 2018. It's even more comprehensive than it was before. And actually, I think Andrew can confirm this. The standard the audit was put against was the new accreditation scheme. So the audit has flagged to us, obviously, areas that we already knew that we needed to improve in terms of our policy and procedures. Now, the audit requirements are very heavy on policy and procedures. The implementation, they acknowledge, because of being in the sector for 20 years, I have not worked in a museum that is in a similar situation to this one in terms of the backlog, the scale of the backlog. Every museum has a backlog, and part of the accreditation process is a documentation plan, and they are looking for us to outline what are the issues that we have you quantified them, and what is your action plan to addressing them with the time scale. And at the moment, the entire team has turned to working on this return, which is due in September, and we are well along the route now to achieving the requirements of the accreditation return. So no, we're not going to fix our problems for the 1st of September, but what we will have is this plan of how we will achieve it, and it won't be even within 5 years. These plans can go up to 10 years. You know, it just depends on your capacity, your resources, how much funding you anticipate having or finding or applying for, and other pressures like capital projects. So by the 1st of September, we will be in a better state than we were when this audit was undertaken. And I feel quite confident that we will be in a very much better place than we probably were a few years ago.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Amy.
Amy.
Doreen, does that answer your questions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Councillor Gillian.
Thanks very much. I think you can all understand, having read this audit report, that it has had a worrying impact on us all, and you know, quite rightly so. The major risk rating with limited assurance, alongside only around 10% of the collection recorded on the database, and significant weakness in loan management, will tend to set alarm bells ringing, and quite rightly so. I totally get where everyone's coming from, but you must understand how concerned we are about it. And by saying that other museums are in the same state doesn't actually help us very much. For me, taking records is surely a fundamental task, yet it appears that even that's been missed, which I think is unfortunate. Now, I get all about going back into 2020, and I totally understand all of that. That's all well and good, but it does mean that there is a huge amount of work that needs to be carried out within the service to actually get into a proper or appropriate state. If we don't make accreditation, and I get that you're giving us the assurance that you think we will, do we have a contingency plan? Because obviously that's what we possibly do need in place. And then the audit notes that 41% of sampled high value items were not recorded on the asset database. What assurance can be given that the council has an accurate understanding of the location, condition, and value of its most significant assets? Thank you.
Alan, do you want to pick
Yeah.
that one up?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Owen. Yeah, I completely understand when reading the audit that we shared the same concerns. We thought it reads in a way, and I suppose part of that that's partly the good thing about the audit report as well, is that it shines a light on some of these legitimate concerns. Now, I don't think Amy tried to alleviate concerns by saying every museum has its issues. I think what Amy's done is use her experience of working in the sector for 20 years to try and put into context some of the challenges that we're facing aren't unique. That's not to make them feel better. I want just to be clear on that. What I would say, however, is that of the 25,000 on the central database, there are many more. Vast majority, which we have records for. The difficulty is they're not all in one place. That makes them less readily available to view and for the public to access, and it makes it more difficult for us to work with our partners to produce developmental plans, to have different displays, to get the storytelling right. So there definitely are challenges there. For the latter part, I'll come back to Amy in a second, but what I would say the audit also showed was that every item that was looked for was found, and that we are in a place where the actions I think that we have in place will and could show give the assurances, I suppose what I'm trying to say, that that we do largely know what we've got, and certainly from a high value point of view, we know what we've got. But Amy can come in specifically around the audit item.
Yes, sure. In terms of accreditation, if you don't receive full accreditation, you can receive what's known as provisional accreditation, and they will give you additional time to improve the areas where they felt you were a bit weak. In my experience, I am not aware of any museums that have lost accreditation through. I know of museums that have lost accreditation because they've either changed venues or a significant change in how they operate, but not lost through lack of improvement. So they want you to succeed. So the backup plan is we would then achieve a provisional accreditation and then work towards the areas of improvement that they target to us based on that. And they give you a time scale for that. In terms of paperwork and assets, our museum collections are an amalgamation of many smaller museum collections. If you're familiar at all with that, it's in our collection development policy, which is online. But I mean, some of the museums started in the 1830s, 1840s. So we're dealing with a lot of physical paperwork. Accession registers from that time, accession registers from later on. Kind of in the 20th century, there was a move towards increasing professionalism. So whenever an object would enter the museum services collection, you would do what's called an entry form, which records all the data of who gave it to you, what is it on loan, is it a donation, do they give you the legal title to this object? And we have thousands and thousands and thousands of those pieces of paperwork that tell us exactly that information. They're sitting in about 30 filing cabinets in this building. What hasn't happened as yet is all of that information being translated into a single digital database. And as you can imagine, that is going to take some time. You can only prioritize, the areas that you can prioritize. So at the moment, we have prioritized sorting out the objects, the 1,000 objects that have been chosen for the new Museum of Aberdeenshire, because we need to ensure we own them, that they are, not on loan, that they are well documented, and we know exactly the story behind them. But also, we are now prioritizing as well, making sure those lists and paper documentation that we do have for the high value assets are placed onto the database as well. But you can appreciate that that's, a dual task that we're working through as we can.
Gillian?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bell. Anne.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alan, Lawrence and Amy, for all your explanations so far. My concern is over the emergency plans. It concerns me that, 1 in 3 of our museums' emergency plans are outdated, and that we don't seem to have any local itemised salvage lists held at our museums. And as has been said often, more times than once today, we hold some very valuable items. Now, I'm sure you're addressing this, but I do have concerns, and especially about the health and safety of staff as well. So maybe you could give me some information about our emergency plans, please.
Yeah, absolutely. For context, Councillor Bell, thank you for the comments. The one relates to Museums HQ, so it doesn't relate to the public facing museums. However, in what I would say, it also refers to some of the day-to-day operational control documents. For example, what do you do if the fire alarm goes off? That policy, it exists. It just hasn't been revised and is therefore out of date. Now that will be resolved with the team, and certainly the new appointment of the museum technician. Part of that fundamental remit will be to ensure that that is maintained, and in between them starting, of course, it is getting reviewed at the moment. In terms of the other operational responsibilities around health and safety, they exist in the same way as they do in all other facilities. So therefore your statutory inspections, your planned preventive maintenance programs, your fire suppression systems are all in place in all of the venues, so and that includes security as well, especially at Museums HQ, where we have made investments over the last 18 months as well to strengthen some of that too. So absolutely take your point and share it. But having been in it and seen it myself as well, I have that assurance that the health and safety element of staff is taken very seriously, albeit I do think that the audit has found some useful gaps where we need to just tidy up. In terms of your other point, sorry, forgive me, Councillor Bell.
It was about salvage. The itemised salvage list, yes, because they should be held at museums.
Absolutely. So there are salvage plans, but again, I think they're just needing to be refreshed. But I'll ask Amy to come in for that.
Yes. So we have policies and procedures in place for the protection of people. So I think we maybe need a slight differentiation between what emergency plan means. So in terms of people, yes, we are covered for that, but it's more emergency plan in this context is about what you do with your collection if there's an emergency. And the documents we have for the 3 venues that we have were completed for the last accreditation, and they had not been revisited as yet. With it, I mean, they have the information that we require, but they have not been refreshed. The point about the salvage list items, we do have a list of salvage high priority items within those documents, but since they were written, we have since had additional valuations done on the collections, and those items have actually been surpassed in value by other items. So what we are currently doing is refreshing those lists to then include, the higher value ones, and which have now surpassed the other ones. So there is documentation in place, but yes, I do acknowledge that they need updated, and they are being currently updated for our accreditation return.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Grant. Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the updates. My first question was about whether all the outstanding issues highlighted in the report would be resolved by September, which has been addressed by comments from Alan and Amy. Next thing I wanted to pick up on was the aspect about stock taking. It says no regular stock taking undertaken, which Amy has mentioned before, which can only exacerbate the backlog and the cataloguing issue. Mr. Ray gave assurance that operational gaps would be resolved. I'm just wondering, this might be a big ask, given the document mentions a 40-year backlog going back 10 years, even before Aberdeenshire Council was founded. And as Amy mentioned, we've got museums going back into not the last century, the century before the last century now. So given that you said these operational issues would be resolved, which I'm presuming includes stock taking, is there any time frame in mind, even projected or estimated, for catching up on this? And just on that point of the lack of documentation and reputational risk as well. I mean, in reading this audit, perhaps if I was a potential future donor, I might be a little worried about donating a high value item. And I'm just recalling from a year or so ago the P&J coverage of the Paolo Veronese Pool of Bethesda painting that couldn't be located after being at the Arbuthnot Museum in Peterhead. I don't know if there's any update on that, but certainly on the plans for catching up and the record keeping would be welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Grant. In terms of the sampling, we can certainly introduce that and reintroduce that with what we've got, and that was done within audit. So I think there's absolutely things we can do in the short order to replicate some of the good practices which we've learned from the auditing cycle as well. Will that capture the whole collections? No. And to put a finer point on that, how long will it take to get everything onto that single database? I couldn't answer that. You know, if I'm being completely honest with you, that's really down to us working within our means, and if we want to accelerate that, then that would require, as kind of alluded to before, that we'd need to either seek some funding or from either external source or from the council, and that would be an elected member decision when it comes to budget setting. I think what we can do is control the controllables, and the rest I think we can control, but it will just take a little bit longer to get there. And I think that's been the salient point. Particular items, I don't have any updates for you to hand, but I can certainly come back at a later stage if you prefer to drop me a note.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much. I mean, I appreciate it's an enormous task, and I suppose one upside is once you get everything off the floppy disks, they could perhaps be exhibited as well. Thank you. Councillor Miller, Craig.
Thank you. A lot of what I was going to say has been covered already, so I think I only have a couple of questions regarding accreditation. Are the criteria required to gain accreditation, are they more stringent than what we would expect from Aberdeenshire Council in terms of what this audit report has thrown up? And secondly, on the management response, there's a lot of justification as to why we are where we are and not a lot of forward-looking planning. So what I'm interested in is we've got this 10%, 25,000 database. Where was that 5 years ago? How long has it taken us to get to the 10%? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so in terms of where were we 5 years ago, again, I don't have that information to hand. I don't know if Amy might, and you maybe be able to speak to the kind of rate as to what's coming through, and around accreditation, given that it's an industry standard. I think what it will do is complement what we do in terms of the best practice guidance versus the operational application. The audit, I think, has been a very helpful exercise in asking that question of do we do what we say we do, and then I think that backdrop of that external governance there and security from the industry you can help prop that up, but I'll ask Amy to add if that's okay.
Yes, I believe this audit that we're speaking about was pretty much mapped across from the accreditation standard, so it is very aligned to what we are submitting. So the things that were flagged up, yes, we know we're addressing them, and we know that. So I don't think there's additional criteria for it reaching accreditation standard. In terms of the database, I think when I was brought on board in 2021, there was approximately 22,000 records on the database. And now we have about 25,000. Saying that, we haven't we've been updating it, but we haven't had a regular system until quite recently of updating it quite comprehensively, just because of the pressures of the capital project. And now we're at the stage with the capital project where we're definitely updating very regularly. So I think, a rate of about 1,000 records a year, perhaps, but that's just with our current complement of staff. If we get volunteers or if we get additional support through projects or etc., that may increase. But it very much varies, the speed at which we can update that record, the database, because obviously we have many other pressures too. So, so it's yes, when we can get at it and making the time.
Okay, thank you for the answers. They're not necessarily encouraging in terms of the accreditation. And based on 1,000 a year, that's 225 years before we get our database up to date, which is definitely not encouraging. One other question that's occurred to me whilst you've been speaking is you talk about policies and procedures that either don't exist or are out of date. And for me, they're the same thing. The only thing that is different is that if they are out of date, it's probably easier to update them than creating something from new. How many of these in the last year have been updated or implemented from scratch? Thank you.
Yeah, I can comment on that.
Okay.
Just in the past month, I've written 4, and I believe my curatorial team are writing at least 5 more, and there's 3 more to do. So we have quite a few yet to reach the 1st of September, but we're working at pace. So there's been quite a lot that we've had to start from scratch because there wasn't anything previously, or it was so out of date, 15 to 20 years out of date, that it was not usable because the standard has moved on since that time.
Yeah. I mean, what I would also add as well is that, you know, to your point, when things are out of date, they may as well not exist, and it might just be a little bit easier to pull them together. Clearly, we've been through policy committee last September with 5 policy revisions, and then also in the run up to our public-facing libraries, so Bankery, but also the seasonal farming museum. There's a whole host of operational policies and procedures which have been updated and reviewed and signed off as well. So there's a lot of the routine day-to-day things which do get done. I want to make that point. But as Amy said, with the reaccreditation, so for example, a conservation plan, which didn't exist previously. However, we have the qualified staff that have been and got the conservation lab up and running. That qualified member of staff is trained through their qualification, not necessarily through a policy, and that plan is now part of the reaccreditation. Therefore, it's being drafted so that it can sit there, and that will act as continuity going forward and get us ready for developing the service. So, so some of that context I think is quite useful.
Okay, Councillor Turner. Alan.
Thank you very much, Chair. I guess I've a slight advantage. I've heard all the other answers and questions that have come in. So quite simply, I do like external accreditation. I like it in many different things because it provides a very good benchmark and a very good standard to actually work towards. I also recognise the fact that that does drive improvement from other areas as well, which overall improves the actual service that's delivered. But having said all of that, I'm going to try and simplify it. And if you'd learned anything from me, I always try to use analogies. So I read the external accreditation is helping quite a lot in terms of the audit actions. I've heard that in the responses. But the key thing I note is our accreditation runs out on the 31st of August, 26, which tells me on the 1st of September we're no longer accredited, yet our submission date is due in September. I don't know how long the actual submission takes to be assessed, etc. You have talked about stages, partial, full accreditation, etc. But it's timeline I'm thinking on there. And I've alluded to analogies. Let me put it, I'm not an expert in museums and the services here, but let me put it if I take a little step to the side, indulge me a little. Vehicle accreditation comes up on an annual level, and if it is not done, you can't put the vehicle on the road. And I'm thinking of like with that MOT, I think in terms of training requirements that we, even as elected members and everything we get renewal dates for which we have to redo the training for that particular competency. Sometimes the training requirements are actually different, they're more stringent, but we still have to have them done by a specific date, or we're right back to the start. So I guess my question is, why are we doing the reaccreditation in September as opposed to now? Maybe the logical one, because you would typically always do, my own experience, your reaccreditation submission would be in before, and I ask it purely because that would have addressed a lot of the audit recommendations as well, if I may.
Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Turner. I mean, to use that analogy, I mean, I think to compare the museum service with, with vehicles, kind of like apples and pears, if I'm honest. But in terms of the underlying point, I get what you're saying. Good practice. If I use my background, which is predominantly in leisure, and you would have kite marks and quality assurances, and these are continual improvement frameworks that you work towards. So and I think what the service has and can demonstrate is a move towards continual improvement, and that's been evident for the last kind of 5 or 6 years. That continual improvement does get us in a place where that reaccreditation process it does not feel like it is too much too soon, or we're starting from a point of nowhere. We're on the right path there, and we obviously talk to the sector very regularly as well. So there's no surprises. There's no surprises with ourselves, and there's no surprises with the governing bodies either. The accreditation has a date previously which runs out on the 31st of August. The submission deadline, I think, for the paperwork, and Amy will correct me if I'm wrong, it's the 1st of September. That's the deadline that we're working towards. Now, they themselves dictate the timelines that we work to, not we don't dictate to them when we're ready. So we wouldn't expect to lose accreditation to then re-get accreditation, but Amy will be able to tell you the exact kind of language that's used in that, just so that you're aware. Thank you.
Yes, so the accreditation scheme is very much dictated by the scheme itself. I think best practice for them is that you would be reaccredited every 5 years, but obviously COVID kind of messed that schedule up for them. But you are invited to apply. So they give you a yearly email to say you have, in a year's time, you're going to be invited to apply. They give you a 6-monthly email to say in 6 months you are invited to apply, and we expect it on this date. And then they want it on that date because they have a very tight schedule themselves, administering to hundreds of museums across the UK. I have heard anecdotally from some museum friends in the Northeast that it takes over 6 months at the moment for them to assess your paperwork. Hopefully it's a bit faster this time, but I don't know until we're there. But in the meantime, we will continue to hold the accreditation standard that we were given until they say otherwise. So it's not like it just stops. So we maintain that until they say, you know, you've received it again or provisional. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, but it is very much a process dictated by the body itself rather than us saying, oh, we'd like to do it. Yeah.
But it's a dialogue which is very open and informed. I think it's the salient point here.
Yeah, so just to clarify, if I may, and that's good to hear, but just wanted to clarify. Yes, it says, okay, it runs out and remain accredited until the 31st of August. You've said our due date is 1st of September, understand that. Would I be right in saying if for any reason you can't meet the 1st of September, you're in dialogue with them such that they know it's, say, coming in the 8th of September, that sort of thing? You know, otherwise, my question basically is, obviously, it runs out. They're not going to carry on if they haven't got assurance that there's actually work being done to put something in. They will, I mean, I would assume, move to it's all, you know, the accreditation would be lapsed. Can you just confirm that?
Yeah, we can confirm that, Councillor Turner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Forsyth. Alistair.
Yeah, I've listened with great interest to all the situation with this particular audit. What hasn't been mentioned, and it's something that bothers me about the whole inventory of the museum service, if only 10% of it is catalogued. How do we underwrite the other 90%? Because we're custodians of all of that. And in the event of a loss, I think we're going to have some red faces because we don't know what we've got. We don't know what the value of it is. How are we dealing with that? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. As said previously, we do know what we have. We just don't have it all in a central database. This is the cataloguing that Amy is referenced, and the different types of formats that it takes place. And we want to have that all in one place. One of the advantages of having it all in one place is that visibility, and then also the access to it. And that, you know, we have all this rich history. You want people to have access to it. But in terms of in terms of how do you know what you've got and where it is, and if you lose it, you know, that's why we do have our salvage plans, which are being updated and renewed. But then we also work closely with our insurance colleagues as well, to ensure that should there be a catastrophic event, we do know what is in what location, and the values to it. Now, a lot of these items aren't replaceable, but there is a material cover there. But again, Amy, if you wanted to come in and add to that, you're very welcome to.
Yeah, sure. In terms of the paper-based records, yes, there is a risk at the moment because they are paper and paper burns. So hopefully, yes, that is an issue that we know we have. But in terms of financial implications, we do know our highest value items, and we do have those itemized, and we have, and then the rest of the way our insurance works is there's the high itemization, but then there's also a blanket cover for buildings and the contents of said buildings. So, you know, the 20 farming spades we have next door, you know, they'll be covered in the blanket policy rather than itemized. Like, you know, the painting down the hall will probably be itemized. But yes, there is, I mean, we believe adequate cover, but obviously, yes, as we improve cataloging, that will also improve to know how many spades do we have, you know, so that will improve things as we move on.
Yeah, my comment is it's, you know, from my point of view, it's a very relaxed approach, and you know, I'm not assured. Thank you.
Councillor Grant Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to pick up on a couple of things that have been said recently. Amy, you mentioned in 2021 there were 22,000 items in a database, and that had risen to 25,000 a year ago. I'm wondering, is this increase due purely, I mean, I don't know how many new items you get on an annual basis, but is that increase substantially due to new donations, or is it mainly catching up on past items that are in analogue recording setups? In terms of the accreditation running out, I take on board what's just been said about it doesn't stop. It will enter a sort of informal lapsed period, so you do have that opportunity to catch up. But I'm just wondering how that might potentially impact operationally. Would it have any impact, say, on the insurance for items if we're no longer accredited? Yeah, I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can come in, Chair, the accreditation it doesn't impact the insurance. Just to be clear about that. You know, and then in terms of the cataloguing, and again, Amy will come in, but the cataloguing is a continual theme of work for everyone within the museum service. Now, the problem is obviously you have the day job, which gets in the way of that, and as soon as so therefore you get peaks and troughs with that, and then yeah, I mean that index takes pace. If you want to increase the pace, then the resource needs to increase. Is essentially the formula. Now that's something that that certainly we can take stock of and look at. I would say that the service has historically worked within a defined budget, and if that's to increase, then we would need to mitigate that increase in provision, and you would obviously through full council want to agree to that. So I think there is a balance to be struck there as well in terms of how you get that feeling that pace is at the correct level.
And I'll come in on the database query. I would say that the increases are partly due to new objects being added onto the database. And then the other aspects are historic objects that we have paperwork for being added kind of in an ad hoc way. So if we were doing an exhibition at the Farming Museum, we would look up the paperwork and the records for all of those objects. And if it's not in the database, we would add them to the database. Then we can log that they've left the building, they've gone to a different building, et cetera, et cetera. So at the moment it's very much new acquisitions as well as updating things when we have to. And then slowly now adding on to the database the things that we have chosen to go into the new museum.
Thanks both. I don't expect an exact figure, but just roughly out of that, say 5,000, 3,000 increase, or even on a sort of annual basis, roughly how many new acquisitions do you get? I appreciate it's.
Yeah, I would say maybe because we have 2 acquisitions panels a year, and we'd maybe have about. It depends. Some collections are very large, and some are just a single item. So I would say maybe 100 to 150 items per year, perhaps.
Okay, thanks. So a drop in the ocean in terms of these figures. Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's no further hands up. I've got a quick question of Lawrence. Firstly, the issues and gaps that you identified that Avril Nicol had identified to you back in 2020, was it you mentioned? Are these part of the issues and gaps that were highlighted to internal audit when they were carrying out the field work?
I imagine they would have been, Chair. I wasn't involved in the field work directly, but there's certainly, I can't remember Avril's exact words to me when she had been in post for about a year and came along and said we need to do something pretty significant with our museums and collections team, because there's decades of neglect, I think, were was the phrase she used, and that might sound quite dramatic, but I think Avril was always pretty spot on with her assessment of situations, and we agreed to the restructure. We agreed to get Amy's post advertised, get Amy in place. And these things take time. We've got a huge collection. We know where everything is. We just don't have it all in one place. That point has been made, and Amy's been doing a fantastic job of getting us into a bit better shape, but that will take time. 225 years was referenced earlier. I hope it certainly won't take that long, but it will take time with the current resources that we have. That's just the reality of the situation. I am assured through Alan that we've got all the right measures in place. Capacity is a challenge, but of course in the intervening 5 years we have, or the council has demonstrated its commitment and ambition to culture and museums by agreeing to a new museum of Aberdeenshire, which has taken up a huge amount of Amy's time. Understand, bids going into National Heritage Lottery Fund and so on takes up a huge amount of time, and that's where the priority's been. We also held a couple posts that we haven't advertised because we were waiting to get to a more concrete stage in terms of the development of the museum. However, in terms of your question and the audit, yeah, absolutely, that the context was shared with our colleagues in internal audit during the process of the audit activity and fieldwork. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, thank you, Lawrence. And I can well imagine Avril's descriptions of the gaps and issues that were raised. I've heard throughout, we know where everything is, yet we only know what 10% of that is according to the records database. And potentially 250,000 items, which it's going to take quite a while to catalogue. So just a quick question on the back of the questions around the museum going forward and what is going to or may not happen September onwards. What effect will not being accredited have on the cultural quarter in Peterhead? Would anybody like to have an answer to that?
Yeah, I can come in there, Chair, if you'd like. I mean, the lottery funding submission is in, along with a robust business plan and an interpretation plan as well. The accreditation, hypothetically, let's say, we don't think that will be the case, and that's not about us being relaxed, it's about us being informed. We will get a reaccreditation. We haven't lost it, and we won't lose it. However, if we did, that wouldn't stop the project from happening. I think what Amy's alluded to previously is the effect that that might have when it comes to exchange of items and the acquisitions of new storytelling and interpretations as we go forward. But what we're not banking on the reaccreditation to achieve the levelling up project, the Museum of Aberdeenshire project, to help simplify matters in that respect. Clearly, we want to be best in show in terms of the Museum of Aberdeenshire, and we want that to be something that everyone's very proud of. And part of that is also attaining and retaining our accreditation within the standards within Scotland. So that's very much our intention, and we're quite determined that will happen. What I would also say is that the audit is very, as I say, very helpful in identifying some of the operational deficiencies. I would say that what I said at the very start, this is a service which has been continually getting better over the last 5 years and continues to do so, to the point where the confidence in us from our national bodies is quite clear and evident, and I think we are showing through the expertise and the experience in the service that we're on the right path, and that's really how I wanted to give you some assurances over your question, Chair. Hopefully that's okay.
May I also come in?
Yeah, certainly.
And just to clarify the accreditation process, I am in fact submitting 3 separate applications for accreditation because it's tied to a building. So because we operate Museums HQ, Bankery Museum, and the Farming Museum, there are 3 applications we make. A lot of the documentation is the same, but obviously like emergency plans would be different. So the new museum, we would have to go through the process again for that building when it's time to do so.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, so let's go back to 2020 when issues and gaps had been identified and carried forward as issues and gaps, and then raised to the audit team whilst the field work was being carried out. What would actually close these issues and gaps? What is needed? Because we have an issue with an awful lot of areas that have been identified, and some of these, if not all of them, are long-standing issues. So how do we address them? What is required at this moment in time to put in place some form of what I can only see is a rescue plan, because that is quite possibly needed. So given that we've got 6-year-old, or more than 6 years, but identified 6 years ago, issues and gaps that are still prevalent today and were raised to the audit team during the fieldwork process, what is needed now?
Thank you, Chair. Simply put, what is needed now is some time. If you boil down the audit itself, and I did when I spoke to the auditor after, when we were compiling the results, and I asked the question, if the reaccreditation process had happened and then the audit followed, how would the assurance level change? And I think it wouldn't, is a short answer to that, and I don't think we would probably want it to either, because I don't think that would necessarily reflect the challenges of the past, which we will have for some time. They won't go away. With the documentation, there's twofold basically. There's the record keeping issue here, which is unpacking years and years worth of different iterations of different services and different practices, going back to, as Amy mentioned, I think we can go back as far as 1850s, around how that has been found its way to today, and then the terms of the loans. I mean, the reason that we have all the heritage facilities that there are around Aberdeenshire is because items have been loaned and issued. Now, without getting into a discussion around provenance and ownership and things like that, the issue here is to say, well, actually, we as the incumbents and the right people around it, There's operational things which will get put right, and we can have those framed conversations with our colleagues and volunteers. But actually, we would never want to pull things back in to then reloan them back out, for example. That's developmental work, what we need to do. So that, again, developmental work is time onerous. So you're asking me the question of what do we need to do to solve it. The fundamental part is time, and if we don't have time, then it's resource and investment into the service. I think there's been some good suggestions around the use of volunteers, but it comes down to the type of service and size of service that the council has the appetite for.
Okay, everything takes time. Yeah, it's the time and the resource. The resource and the investment that you mentioned later on that is required. The value of the assets of the museum service, I'll take a wild stab in the dark, being not a museums expert or an arts expert, etc., runs into the many millions of pounds, some of which is not ours. We have before us today an audit report that is not a good read. It's a case of what we do with that audit report now. Am I assured that things are going to improve? From what I've heard today, the answer has to be no. I leave the other members to come up with suggestions. So I'll open it up. Members, any thoughts on direction moving forward? Councillor Mayor Doreen.
Yeah, I think we're going to, I've changed my mind. I think we're going to add more pressure onto the service by escalating this. I think if the service could come up with a comprehensive plan to attract volunteers, etc., to enable that cataloguing of that back, stuff that's not known about or known in various forms, and perhaps a way of linking in the various different indices that there are. I think that would be a better way forward. I do worry that we are going to add more pressure onto the system, and especially with the Museum of Aberdeenshire coming forward. So I don't know if the service would like to come back on that, whether that would be possible. I think we could also link it in with raising the profile of the service, and put out good news stories about the new museum, and if we get volunteers in, what they're discovering, etc., etc. So I think there's a whole bit that we could help with, rather than if we go ahead and escalate this further.
Okay, thank you, Doreen. Councillor Forsyth, Alistair.
Yeah, I get the distinct feeling that we seem to be revolved around accreditation. Now, there was a statement made in the conversation that the accreditation has no fundamental bearing on the underwriting of it. So that puts a question in my mind as to the veracity of the accreditation. And what's the point of it if it doesn't have an impact on insurance? So, I feel that the accreditation issue is getting in the way of the question that you asked, Chair. What do we need to do to fix this? And the response was, we need time and we need finance. But before I'm assured, I need to know how much time and how much money it's going to take to put it right, because otherwise it's becoming very nebulous. So I would encourage the service to come back with some numbers on that particular item. Thank you.
Okay, given that question. Alan, do you have any ideas as to that?
Well, I mean, we'd need to go away and do the task frequency work. I mean, I couldn't sit here and tell you how long it would take to put one item in. Now, maybe we might have an idea, but I would suggest it would depend on the item and the provenance and the size and shape and all that sort of stuff too. But certainly, it's an exercise that we can go away and go with. You know, and we would have to start it off with a blue sky thinking. If we didn't, if budget and time wasn't an issue, what resource would we need to how quickly get us to that kind of 95% of all assets being on the same central database, and we can slide that back to create a kind of appraisal of percentage complete versus time, if you like, and that would associate with cost, because we would need to quantify that in terms of man hours and therefore staff time. So I think we would be able to do that, Chair, fairly quickly, to give you that perspective as to what that means in real terms, to put a tangible action in, as you suggested.
Yeah, I'll just bring Rob Simpson in.
Thank you. So the question is, are you assured or not assured? Ultimately, if you are not assured, you can monitor it through the recommendations, through the audit plan that comes back before you, or it can enter into the committee review process. Alternatively, you could defer and you could seek a further report to come back through to this committee with additional information. I do not, and Lauren may correct me on this, think it is competent to ask for work to be undertaken around volunteers. That is straying into operational activity within the service and not within the power of this committee to instruct officers to undertake. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Councillor Turner. Alan.
Oh, I like it when Mr. Simpson comes in before me, because he's spelt out what was exactly where I was going with this, and it's so much better as well. But what I'll do is I'll put some dates in, because I looked at it. If we go what would be a committee type process, that's communities, which if I look at the timeline, meets in right at the start of September. Audit itself meets the following week. I personally think when I hear everything that's been said by the service, and I'm conscious of what Mr. Ray said in terms of time and everything, I'm also conscious of the fact they need to get that submission in for the re-accreditation and the resources they've got. Where I actually think, if it was me, initially I was thinking along the lines of a stage one type approach, but I realise that puts a lot more work onto the actual service when they're already strained. I would be looking at a deferral, and my suggestion somewhere around is, rather than have it coming in early September, because it's not going to meet the papers in terms of, if I hear the dates for submission, is it's actually delayed 2 cycles, and then the report comes back and where the progress is, the service is, and everything in November. That would be my thoughts, etc. And that's working, I think, to an extent with what the service has said today. And also it's picking up the fact that there will be progress made on the actions that was identified in the audit and everything. But welcome comments from everyone else.
Yeah, thank you for that. You mentioned the referral and it putting pressure on the service. We're here to be assured or not assured. So the pressure that goes on to the service is immaterial of our decision.
Yes, I agree with you, and it's pressure. I'll say workload, and I agree with you again on that. Audit, that is the beauty of audit and scrutiny, etc. It is to obviously be assured, and if not assured, to take steps to gain assurance. But I'm also at the same thing as to we have to have a clear understanding of what will require us to be assured, because I've heard figures again as to how long it would take to get a full catalogue of things done as well, and that clearly is not going to happen and in what would be a short period of time through to what is early November. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Grant Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to follow up, to follow on what's been said so far. I mean, currently I don't feel assured on the basis of what we've heard today, not on the basis of the intent expressed by officers and the desire to improve things. I think ultimately, we've heard time and resource mentioned, and I think resource is really behind it. So we do need to tease out what is required to improve situations. Escalation, that's an option open to us, and I'm aware of what's been said about the potential of adding pressure to the officer workload and the need to get reaccreditation sorted for September. So I think certainly I'm open to agreeing with the proposal to defer for a couple of cycles.
Councillor Craig.
Thank you. Well, when we started this an hour and 20 minutes ago, I wasn't assured. I'm probably less assured after that discussion. And I'd like to clarify with Mr. Simpson, because the internal audit manager the last couple of cycles has mentioned that deferral really shouldn't be an option. We should either be assured or not. And if we're not, the option should be stage one. And just to clarify that, I'm not expecting, listening to the discussions, that we are suddenly going to have 250,000 items catalogued at the next after the stage one referral reports. But I would say that stage one needs to have a detailed action plan in terms of money and resources over an acceptable timeline that we can all agree to. Thank you.
Yeah, I can assure you I'm not just taking advantage of Jamie not being here, but a deferral can sometimes be a suitable option. It is not a preferred option, but it can be a suitable option where we think there can be movement and that can provide the assurance required over that period of time. So it can be an option for the committee. I say it's not a preferred route, but it is there for us to use.
I mean, I think in this case, I'd be less inclined to deferral, given that it seems it's taken 3 years to do less than 3,000 items. So we need a better timeline than that. And I think if we deferred it a couple of cycles, I don't think we'd be much further down the road. I think it needs a more formal approach.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands up. I too am not assured. I've got one quick question for internal audit, if I may. To use the term, the catalogue of audit findings in relation to the museum service, would the accreditation documentation go any way to appeasing those, or are we looking at apples and pears again? We're looking at purely and simply the governance and the finance, etc., whereas we're not sure what the museum accreditation depth goes into.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We did base our audit testing on the requirements of the accreditation. I would say, though, there would still be some gaps, even if accreditation was achieved potentially. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll look for Murray. Is that?
Yeah. So sorry, it was just a question about the deferral versus movement to stage one. Just to facilitate time for the reaccreditation to take place. If we were to go for a stage one, do we have any say over the timescale of when that would take place, so that in effect it's kind of equivalent to deferring for a cycle or two?
We wouldn't normally defer it for a cycle or two. If it's going into the committee review process, it would go to the next committee. So we just go into the cycle as it falls due.
Okay, no more hands. So I'm looking for a motion. Or no, I'm going to ask, is committee assured? No. Right, the pathway. Deferral, I can't see too much moving forwards, because as the service has rightly said, they're concentrating on the accreditation. Yet we're not assured. We cannot leave this audit as it is and then no further action be taken. So I would move that the findings from the audit is moved to a stage 1, and that would move forward to Communities Committee, following the committee review process. That's not to stop the accreditation moving forwards in the background. And with that, I'll seek a seconder. Councillor Miller?
Yeah, happy to second Councillor Cassie's motion.
Okay. Are there any amendments? Councillor Mayor?
Yeah, I would put up forward an amendment that we delay for 2 cycles, get the accreditation over the line, and for the service to come back with some update on where they go to improve this going forward.
Thank you. And do you have a seconder for that, Councillor Turner?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that amendment, and I'll do it partly again if I think the timeline here. If we go to stage 1, that's obviously relying on it goes to the committee process and a decision being taken there. They will take on the stage 1. Assuming that did happen, it would then have to come back to their particular committee before it came back to audits. Either which way, I'm estimating your timeline for having that come back could well be into next year. Whereas I look at a deferral in terms of I get a report back in November time, which is 2 cycles, which basically would actually help address a number of the actions in the actual audit, as well as updating everyone on the accreditation. So it's a time frame for coming back to audit, I think, on, and even at that point in a deferral, we still then have an option of the stage 1, etc. But I'm happy to second what Doreen has put forward as an amendment.
Okay, thank you. Lauren, you want to come in with some legal advice for us?
Thanks, Chair. It was just a very small point because, you know, I'm like that. But around the amendment, it was just to say in terms of that improvement plan coming forward, that's set out in terms of the responses to the recommendations in the report. So anything additional to that is within the remit of the Communities Committee rather than the remit of the Audit Committee to look at. So I just wanted to be really clear about that. Thanks.
Doreen?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I get that. You know, we can take that out of the amendment. I just think it's a more pragmatic way forward. And by that time, with the accreditation over the line, then the officers will have that bit more scope. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll quickly come to summing up. Doreen, did you want to add any more?
No, I think I've said all I can say about it. Don't want to add pressure on pressure. I think, you know, they've inherited a mess and have tried very, very hard to clear up that issue. So I think we just need to, this is the first audit since then, so I think we just need to give them a bit of space.
Yep, thank you. And I too, I think we've had a fairly lengthy discussion around this item. I don't think we need to add any more in the way of summing up. So I'll ask the committee officer to take us through the voting process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A motion is proposed by yourself, Councillor Cassie, and seconded by Councillor Miller to for the committee. Well, the committee is not assured by audit report 2627, and that the matter will be referred to the Communities Committee to commence stage 1 of the committee review process in respect of all points raised within the audit report. The amendment proposed by Councillor Mayer and seconded by Councillor Turner is to defer the matter to the November meeting of the Audit Committee. If you're content with that, Chair, I'll move to the vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Members, if you could please indicate whether you support the motion or the amendment when your name is called. Thank you. Councillor Cassie, please.
Motion.
Councillor Bell. Councillor Bell, please.
Amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Buchan.
Amendment.
Councillor Forsyth.
Motion.
Councillor Grant.
Motion.
Councillor Lonche.
Motion.
Councillor Mayer.
Amendment.
Councillor Mason, please.
Amendment.
Councillor Miller.
Motion.
Councillor Owen.
Amendment.
Councillor Payne.
Motion.
Councillor Reynolds.
Motion.
Councillor Turner.
Amendment.
Chair, we have 7 votes for the motion, 6 for the amendment. The motion is carried.
Yep, thank you very much for that. At 1 o'clock, so we will have to take a break now because I'll ask members. I've just been notified that Paul McCarry, who is the officer for the next audit, is not available this afternoon. Looking at the content of it and similar colours to what we've just discussed in an hour and a half, are you prepared to forego lunch and hear it now, or would you like to take your lunch? And is there anyone else that can come along? Nobody else? And would it be possible to move that audit then into? Paul, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sure, Chair. If members want to take their lunch, it just means I'll reschedule everything this afternoon that I have.
Okay, thank you very much for your kind offer, Paul. We'll break for lunch now. We'll come back at 1:45.